The second evidence is comparative biochemistry. Cells of all organisms are made up of similar proteins and nucleic acids. This supports the theory that all species today arose from a common ancestor. By comparing the similarity of certain chemicals in different species, the phylogenetic relationship between them may be deduced. The first method is by comparing the amino acid sequence in proteins. Each protein is formed by different numbers, types, and sequences of amino acids, and these are the main key to determine the genetic code in DNA. A small change in the genetic code may result in variation in the structure of the protein produced. Scientists proposed that the fewer the differences in the amino acid sequence in the same type of protein of different species, the fewer the mutations which have occurred and the closer the phylogenetic relationship between the species. The table shows the difference in the amino acid sequence of one of the polypeptide chains of hemoglobin between humans and 5 other vertebrates. The polypeptide chain consists of 146 amino acids in total. The amino acid sequence in gorilla hemoglobin differs from that in human hemoglobin by 1 amino acid, while the amino acid sequence in rhesus monkey hemoglobin varies from that in human hemoglobin by 8 amino acids. This suggests that humans are more closely related to gorillas than rhesus monkeys. Based on the same principle, an evolutionary tree of the above organisms can be made. The second method is by comparing the base sequence of DNA. The amino acid sequence in a protein is determined by the base sequence of the DNA. Therefore, the base sequence of the DNA of different species can also be compared to infer the phylogenetic relationship between them. The more similar the base sequence of DNA, the closer the phylogenetic relationship of the species. The table below shows the comparison in the base sequence of DNA between humans and 6 other species of animals. About 97.7% of the base sequence of human DNA is similar to that of gorillas, while only 91.1% is similar to rhesus monkeys. This suggests that humans have a closer phylogenetic relationship with gorillas than rhesus monkeys. This coincides with the findings when amino acid sequences in hemoglobin are compared. When we talk about evolution, there are 2 schools of thought for the mechanism of evolution: Lamarck's theory, known as Lamarckism, and Darwin's theory, or Darwinism. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck proposed his hypothesis to explain the mechanisms of evolution in 1809. Lamarckism suggests that, first, environmental change creates needs that cause organisms to modify their existing structures to meet these needs, meaning to adapt to changes by modifying their body structure. Those structures which were repeatedly used would become well developed, whereas those which are not used would degenerate. If we use giraffes as examples, the original giraffes have short necks. They frequently stretched their necks in order to feed on leaves in higher branches of the trees. Then, he suggested that those characteristics that were modified will be passed on to later generations. When giraffes give birth to their offspring, new giraffes are born with longer necks, and they also stretch their necks to feed on leaves on even higher branches. After many cycles, The repetition of this process through generations would result in the accumulation of various acquired characters. This would make organisms different from their ancestors and produce new individuals. The giraffes, after many generations, will accumulate the characteristics of stretched necks and will have longer and longer necks. However, there is much evidence to show that the acquired characters cannot be inherited. One experiment was carried out by scientist August Weismann to test Lamarck's idea. He cut off the tails of mice over many generations. According to Lamarck's theory, the offspring of these tailless mice should inherit the characteristic and its offspring should have no tail. However, he found that mice of each generation were born with complete tails. This showed that acquired characters were not passed on to later generations, thus disproving Lamarckism. Darwin, on the other hand, came up on a different theory. Darwin, after graduation from university, went on a voyage on the Beagle in 1831 for 5 years. During the trip, Darwin visited the Galapagos Islands near South America. He observed that animals living on the islands are quite unique and could not be found anywhere else in the world. Many organisms of similar types living on these islands have structural differences from each other. Darwin was particularly interested in 14 species of finches, which all had different beaks, but otherwise structurally similar to the finches found on the mainland of South America. This suggested the finches on Galapagos Islands have descended from a common ancestor. When the original seed-eating finches arrived at the Galapagos Islands, they couldn't find enough food. Variations in the beaks of the finches enabled them to eat other types of food available. Therefore, the finches with different beaks adapted to different types of food and could survive, reproduce, and pass on favorable variations to their offsprings. When Darwin got back to the UK, he started to develop his idea of theory of natural selection from what he had observed from his voyage. In 1858, Darwin was contacted by Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace also developed a theory of natural selection, and it is identical to Darwin's. Therefore, in the same year, together they put forward the theory of natural selection to explain the mechanism of evolution. In 1859, Darwin wrote and published his book On the Origin of Species, detailing their experiences and ideas. This theory is widely accepted by scientists today because of the large amount of evidence they put forward. To summarize, the theory of natural selection, or simply known as Darwinism, can be summarized with our giraffes. The ancestors of giraffes had variation in neck length. Some had long necks and some had short necks. Giraffes with longer necks could reach the leaves on the higher branches than those of shorter necks. They won the competition for food over short-necked giraffes. A long neck became a favorable character for survival. It allowed the giraffes with long necks to reproduce and pass on the characteristic of long necks to the next generation. This process of natural selection is repeated and accumulated over a long time. Therefore, Darwinism states that due to competition for limited resources, there is a struggle for existence. variation exists within each species. Those organisms with unfavorable variation will be eliminated, while those with favorable variations will be better adapted and have a higher chance to survive and reproduce. The favorable variation will be passed on to their offspring. Thus, nature selects favorable variations, and this process is natural selection. Over time, these favorable variations will accumulate and will become different from its ancestors. Therefore, evolution has occurred. We can see natural selection in action in organisms that reproduce rapidly. In two cases, changes which normally takes place over many generations can be observed within a relatively short period of time.
This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Click on the tab to watch the next part of the video series.